international community means Washington and whoever happens to agree with it. So the majority of the countries in the world, the non-aligned countries, most of the world, have repeatedly and vigorously endorsed Iran's right to enrich uranium within the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, of which it's a member, unlike the U.S. Allies, Israel, India, and Pakistan. In fact, very few people know that the majority of the American people are excluded from the world, too. They also endorse that right, or they did as of a couple of years ago when the last polls were taken. It's very likely different now because of though I haven't seen a poll, because of the massive propaganda campaign to demonize Iran and portray it as a major threat to world peace that's been going on for the last few years. That's the world, and it's necessary to be very delicate in reporting things. So, for example, one of the most popular leaders in the world is President Lula of Brazil, and he's also Washington's fair-haired boy in South America. He's supposed to be the moderate as compared with the bad guys who are going farther left. So it's been necessary for some time to suppress the fact that Lula has been quite openly and strongly supporting Iran's right to do what it wants within the bounds of the law, including develop nuclear power, enrich uranium. If Hugo Chavez says something like that, huge uproar. What do you expect of this demon? But when Lula says the same thing, even more strongly, you have to suppress it. If any of you are going into journalism, you've got to learn these lessons. It became pretty hard to suppress in the last few weeks when President Ahmadinejad visited Brazil. So then, yes, you had to report it and admonish Brazil for stepping out of line. But in fact, relations between Brazil and Iran, in fact South America in general, and Iran have been improving, trade relations and others, because the world outside the West simply doesn't follow U.S. orders the way it's supposed to. It used to, because it was terrified to do anything else, but the world is getting more diverse, and the Godfather is losing his clout to some extent. So it's necessary to kind of suppress what's happening, though it is happening. There's a lot more like this. So take, say, there was a lot of talk. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, Obama announced that he was going to reconfigure the missile defense systems in Eastern Europe, which were regarded by the Soviet Union, by Russia, it's not the Soviet Union anymore, regarded by Russia as a threat to its security, with justice. If you read U.S. arms control journals, you'll find that U.S. strategic analysts, like, say, Theodore Postel over at MIT, recognize that these so-called missile defense systems would have to be construed by the Russians as a threat to their security. There's a good reason for that. Missile defense systems are not for defense. They're first-strike weapons, and that's understood everywhere. I mean, if they ever work, they're not going to stop a first strike, but they could conceivably stop a retaliatory strike. So they're effectively a first-strike weapon, and that's understood by strategic analysts on all sides, almost in the same words. Obama did agree to reconfigure these systems and move them somewhere else, and there was a big debate about whether that was a sellout to the Russians or whether it was, as he said, a better way to defend the world against the threat of Iranian missiles and nuclear weapons. That was the debate. Does the debate make any sense? I mean, suppose Iran had missiles and nuclear weapons. Could it use them? I mean, if they as much as loaded a weapon, the country would be vaporized. And the ruling clerics have not evidenced any wish for mass suicide and destruction of the country that they pretty much own. And in fact, U.S. intelligence analysts specialized in the Middle East consider the threat of an Iranian attack with missiles as so small that you can't even evaluate it. If they're developing, which maybe they are, it would only be as a deterrent, an effort to deter a threatened, very openly threatened U.S.-Israeli attack. Now, the U.S. is not quiet about this. It's openly threatening attack, Israel even more so. In fact, Israel is Israel happens to have nuclear submarines capable of carrying nuclear-tipped torpedoes, gift of Germany, and it's openly sending them through the Suez Canal with the agreement of the Force for Stability and Good, President Mubarak, sending them through the Suez Canal into the Gulf as a threat to Iran, saying, you know, if we want to, we can wipe you out, and you won't be able to do anything about it. So yes, the threats are constant and continuous, but those are coming from the rogue states, the only states that regularly resort to violence and the threat of violence. Who else is occupying two countries in the region and illegally occupying other territories? Who else constantly carries out aggression in the region and other violence? I mean, Iran hasn't done it for probably 2 centuries, but the United States and Israel do it constantly. So yeah, there's a good reason for the Security Council to be concerned with preventive diplomacy in the region, and for others concerned with preventive diplomacy to be concerned too, and particularly the ones here, because we're right at the heart of it. We're at the heart of the use and threat of the use of force and the threat of force in the region. Nobody else begins to compare. Just think it through. It's kind of an intriguing feature of our intellectual culture that these matters cannot be perceived. I mean, it's not that they're profound or hidden. I mean, they're right on the surface, you know, completely on the surface, but they can't be perceived. That is a revealing indication of the strength of the grip of imperial ideology, which comes naturally in the West. It's a history of the West for hundreds of years, so sort of second nature, so much so that it literally cannot be perceived. Though, again, there's absolutely nothing concealed about it. Well, let's turn to the other major trouble spot in the Middle East, Israel-Palestine. What's President Obama's contribution to that? Obama has made actually one major speech about Israel-Palestine. It's when he introduced George Mitchell as his negotiator. Now, Mitchell is a good choice for a negotiator. He was also George Bush's. And he's got a good record. He was prominent in negotiating the peace in Northern Ireland, which is no small achievement. I happened to be in Belfast a couple of weeks ago, and I had been there in 1993. In 1993, it was a war zone. I mean, you couldn't park your car. You know, there were security forces all over the place. People were afraid to go from one area to another because of the threat. Literally a war zone. And this time, it's peaceful on the surface. Like for an outsider like me, it looks peaceful. And of course, the people all look alike, you know, so you don't identify the ones who are in conflict. However, as soon as you travel around a little bit, and with the guidance of people who know Belfast, you see that while it is a vast improvement over what it was, which is a tribute to George Mitchell and Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, the problems still remain not far below the surface. In fact, there still is a regular low level of terror, nothing like what it was, but the divisions remain. There's very little intermingling among the two populations, Unionists and Nationalists. And you see driving through Belfast, you know, a wall of a building with a big painting on it saying, say, Loyalist area, meaning don't enter here or enter at your risk unless you're one of us. The divisions are kind of still there, but they're not violent. They're much less violent. In fact, when I went in 1993, my wife and I were taken from Dublin to Belfast by a young woman who was a Catholic peace activist